Happy Mother's Day. Well, there was this old preacher that went to the bank to cash his check that he had gotten. And he goes up to the teller, and the teller says, "Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry, but all we have is old bills. Are you scared of germs?" He said, "No. On my salary, germs can't even live." And there was this other guy, and he was kind of older, and he bought a lottery ticket, and he won $50,000. But he had a heart condition, and so his wife and daughter wanted to tell him, but they were scared that the shock might hurt his heart and he might die. So they thought about it, and they thought, you know what, I'm going to go and talk to the pastor and see if the pastor can come over. Well, the pastor was available, so the pastor, he came over, and he's talking to him and being really gentle, and he said, "Hey, what would you do if you won $50,000? And the old guy, he thought for a minute, he goes, "You know, I would give half of that money to you." The pastor fell over and died of a heart attack. Okay, I got one more. And since we're talking about mothers, there's this little girl, and she's watching her mother wash the dishes, and she's looking at her, and she thought, "Boy, that hair is just so pretty, Mommy." And she says, "Why do you have white in your hair?" And she has maybe about 4 or 5 strands of white that have been showing up. And she said, "Honey, those strands are when you have done something wrong, and it makes Mommy sad, and I cry, and then one of my hairs will turn white." The little girl's like, "Mommy, why is Grandma's hair all white?" It has been a privilege of mine to get to know the youth in this church. I consider you guys very, very special. Sydney, actually, she was starting to come over to my house on Saturdays, and that was really fun until demo COVID hit. So hopefully we can get back at that. And Michael is one that he's kind of more reserved, and I've had a hard time really connecting with him. And just lately, I feel, hopefully he does too, that we've been getting a little bit closer. And I've also noticed that with him, he is really trying to make some changes. And it's neat to see. He's a kid that has a lot to offer, and I think he takes himself not as serious as he should, because he really needs to step out and let people know who he is. Well, Wednesday night, he has been teaching, which I have always enjoyed when he teaches. And on the way home, he had a fender bender. And I think I was one of the first ones that heard about it. I wasn't there, but I got a secret phone call. And I started praying. I was praying for his safety, for the person he hit safety, and just the overall that the police officers would be nice, that nothing would harm either one of them, and got a call back that everybody was okay. And so I was like, okay. So stopped praying, and then it just hit me again, and this time I cried. And I said, "Oh God, Michael has tried so hard, and he's branching out, and then this happened. And the pain that he's going to go through, and the embarrassment that he's going to go through." And I was just like, "God, you got to help him. I realize, we have to face the consequences, but oh my goodness, the insurance that'll happen, what's going to happen to the other person's car, just all these things that just hit you. And then you go to bed at night and you beat yourself up because you knew better than to do that. It just happened. You beat yourself up. And then you go out to these caring people that you're already so embarrassed you want to forget that it even happened. And they're like, 'Well, how you doing? What happened?' And this is how you should have done it." And so you've got to live through. And I was just feeling all of that. And I was like, "Oh, God, help Michael. Help him to be able to stick it through and make it." And I think maybe that is why I made a mistake then one day later. Not serious. But when I go to work, I have to go through the construction on 74, and I have to cross over to a lane and to get into the fast lane, which we're all going one lane, so nobody has a place to go. And I am nervous about that. I always am. I double, triple, zillion times to make sure that there's nothing coming. And Thursday morning, I look and there's nobody coming, and so I whip real fast, and I'm doing about 55 off of the ramp because I got to get in there. So I whip in there, and there is a car that if she had not slowed up, put on her brakes, my rear end would have hit her front end. And I didn't even see her. I just caught a glimpse, and then I looked, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Her mouth dropped open, and I'm like waving at her like, oh my goodness, I am so sorry, and hoping she understood that I was waving at her like I'm sorry. And she didn't say anything. She just closed her mouth and just kept on driving, and no honking the horn and no cussing me out, which I would have definitely deserved. And I thought, how sweet of her to show me grace. She didn't have to, because I didn't deserve it. But she drove along with me, and then she actually slowed up a little bit, which I was so thankful, because then I could get away from her and not feel that embarrassment of what I had done. And so I was quick, and I got off on my next exit. And anyway, it just stayed with me, how wonderful that she was able to show me grace. And I don't know, I mean, the thing with Michael, there isn't a person in this room with any age on you that you haven't done the same thing. You're embarrassed, and yet it was just a foolish thing. And some of you guys are smarter than me, but I seem to always have blunders. And so it is so nice when someone shows you grace. In 1 Kings chapter 2:19, Solomon was the most intelligent person on earth. And he had a mother that came into the room, and when she came into the room to see the king, Solomon, he bowed to her. And then he also then went to sit up on his throne, and he asked them to put a chair to his right side so his mother could sit beside him. And this is the most smartest man in the world. So any of you young men, take note of what Solomon did, and treat your mom special. It also shows with that just how special God is with his grace. Because if you know Solomon's mother, it was Bathsheba, and she's the one that had the affair with David, and yet here it is, her son is king, and she's sitting at his right hand, and it's symbolic of Christ. And isn't that neat, that you can mess up so much, and yet God gives you a place of importance? It's a grueling job to be a mother. Sometimes it's a thankless job. It's very stressful. You'd like to take a break sometime, but there's always a mom, do this, a place to go, a thing to do. I was just talking to a friend the other day. She had to go home from work early because her daughter was sick and throwing up, and she has 5 kids, and so you know it's going to go through there. And she goes, oh yeah, this is my second one. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I'm through those years, because that can be quite taxing. And I was thinking about when I was raising my kids, Doug and I, before we had children, we discussed my convictions, his convictions, and we decided kind of a plan on how we wanted to raise our kids. And the biggest emphasis that I had was making sure that my children loved God more than life itself. And I wanted my children to also know that when you have happy times, that you talk to God. And when you have sad times, you talk to God. When you're confused, you talk to God. When you're angry, you talk to God. When you're lonely, you talk to God. When something great happens in your life, you talk to God. And I can pass that on to my children because I had a wonderful mother that taught me those things. But as I was going through, and I wanted to bring this up today for somebody who needs to hear this. You know, it's our job to do our best, but we're fallible and we make mistakes. And so as our kids get older, some of them are going to stray away and they're not going to follow Christ. And I want you to know that that's not your responsibility. In Ephesians 2:8 and 9, it says it's not by works that you get your salvation. And that's not just by my works, but it's by the works of my parents. They can't do anything that will help me to get that salvation. In Acts 16:30-31, it says that, as for me and my house, no, you and your household will be saved. In Revelations 3:20, it says that Jesus stands at the door and knocks. And that's not us. That's what God's doing for your children. He's standing at that door and knocks. We can't open that door for him. In Romans 10:9 and 10, it says, if you believe with your heart, justified, mouth you confess, that you'll be saved. So that's all it takes. But it's nothing that we can do for our children. We can pray for them, and we can lay it out there, but we cannot hold the mistakes that we made against ourselves and against, oh my gosh, the anguish that you feel that your child is not following the pathway they should follow. That's not your responsibility. That's God's responsibility. In Matthew 19:25 and 26, the disciples were talking to Jesus, and he said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. The other day, Garrett loves to aggravate me, and he was talking about doing something ornery. I don't even remember what it was, but I said, you know what? I've already raised you. You know right from wrong, and if you want to go ahead and do that and break your mama's heart, you just go for it. He showed up. But I want to tell you today about a story of a very imperfect couple. It's a familiar story. There was the beginning of time. God chose this man to be the leader of the nation of Israel. And this is the first guy, and that man, there's a line that goes all the way to when Jesus was born. And that man was Abraham. Abraham was living in a really nice town. He had a nice house, maybe with his parents. I don't know that. He was older, though. I doubt it. But his dad, for his trade, he made idols and sold idols. So Abraham was from a pagan background. And God spoke to him one day and said, Abraham, I want you to follow after me. And Abraham, stepping out in faith, said, okay, I'll do it. So he took wife and he took his nephew Lot, and they headed out. And then after that, leaving that nice settlement, they lived in tents. For years, they lived in tents. He didn't have a place to go. God says, okay, I'm going to give you Canaan, but it wasn't like, okay, I'm here now, it's mine. It didn't happen like that. So Abraham and Sarah, they're out living out in the desert in the middle of nowhere. They're living in a tent, and the famine hit. And they were starving. And you know, God says that he'll provide, but they were starving. So Abraham gets this great idea. He says, we'll go down to Egypt and we'll live down there for a while, because if we live down there for a while, they've got stuff going on. We can get some food. And so he's almost getting ready to walk into Egypt, and he's like, oh, Sarah, you are still beautiful. And they will see that, and they will want to take you from me, and they'll kill me. So when we get there, we'll just say that you're my sister, and we'll go that route. So they go into Egypt, and sure enough, there was a bunch of people looking at Sarah and how beautiful she is. And he's like, oh, yeah, she's my sister. And they're going through town, and they take Sarah away from him and give him to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh is like, yes, she's beautiful. I want her for my wife. And they gave Abraham a ton of things to bless him for giving up his sister to them. And Pharaoh was also happy, and then there was plagues that hit him. His household was all torn up, and God spoke to him and says, you have just taken Abraham's wife. And Pharaoh's like, what? So he goes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, this is your wife. Why would you tell me it's a sister? Take your wife, take your things, and get out of here. And can you imagine that ride home with Abraham, what Sarah might be thinking? The Bible doesn't talk about it, but I imagine there was a good argument that went on. Well, how did that work, huh? I almost had to be a sex slave, huh? Anyway, not a perfect couple. And then later on, we see God's grace again. I don't know how. God tells Abraham that you're going to be a father of many nations. And so he waits and waits and waits, and Sarah and he don't have any children. And so he doesn't know what to do. Sarah is like, I'm still not pregnant. Well, must be that God doesn't want me to get pregnant. So maybe you're supposed to just have your way with my maidservant. So I would like for you to go and sleep with Hagar. And if she gets pregnant, then that can be your seed that the bloodline will run from. So he goes like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So he goes and he sleeps with Hagar, and Hagar gets pregnant. And then once she finds out she's pregnant, she's like, oh, yeah. And she looks down at Sarah, because it was a real shame if a woman couldn't have children. And so she was like, oh, yeah, I'm the one that's carrying your husband's baby. And it upset Sarah so much. She went to Abraham and she says, I blame this on you. It was her idea. I blame this on you. This shouldn't have happened. And he says, well, you know what? She's your maidservant. You do whatever you want. So then Sarah was not nice to Hagar at all, and Hagar had to leave. Again, doesn't sound like a wonderful, peaceful family. There was a lot going on there. So Hagar, she has this baby, and the baby is named Ishmael, and Abraham doesn't even get to see his boy. So there's that anguish of that. You know, he was proud. Yay, I'm finally going to get a child. And no, you can't even be around him. He has to be out of the picture. So he goes and he's talking to God, and these angels come and they say, you are 100 years old and you're going, he didn't say that, you're 100 years old. Just wanted you guys to know he's 100 years old. And he says, you are going to have a baby with Sarah. Well, Sarah was outside eavesdropping, and she's 90 years old, and she heard that, and she went, there is no way. So she didn't believe what God told her. And we talked about that Wednesday night when somebody is lying to you or lying to the Holy Spirit. There was a couple people in the New Testament that actually died instantly. So it's serious when you don't take God serious. So she laughed because she thought it was ridiculous. I've already been through menopause, and now I'm supposed to be having a baby. And so she was bugged, didn't think that was going to happen. And then God confronted her and said, why would you be laughing at something? You know, I can do anything. And she goes, oh, no, I didn't laugh. So she even lied. Again, God's grace. Over and over again, Abraham and Sarah showed to be ordinary people in an ordinary life. Nothing just outstanding about them. The one thing that they had going for them is their faith and their belief in God and wanting to please God. And God's grace extends everywhere else with all our mess ups. Now, we're not supposed to say, well, we're human and we make mistakes, because we're supposed to strive to be that Proverbs 31 woman that we strive to do what pleases God. But we have to also rely on God's grace, because through God's grace, He'll see it through. Abraham was the father of many nations. And it wasn't because of Abraham, but it's because of what God can do, because God's able.